Before the door chime finished its little song, the clerk had already decided who he was. The counterbell sat untouched, a tiny brass lighthouse no one had visited in years. Fluorescent lights washed everything the same sallow color, gum racks, lottery stand, a tower of energy drinks that seemed to hum with impatience. He set his return on the counter, a sealed phone charger with the receipt neatly folded inside, and said, "Hi, I grabbed the wrong model. Can I swap it?" The clerk didn't look down. She looked through him, the way some people do when they've learned to expect trouble and decided you are the shape of it. "We don't do returns for situations like this," she said, eyes drifting to the convex security mirror as if it might back her up. He blinked, confused, because situations like this was a phrase that pretended to be policy, but felt like a verdict. "I have the receipt," he said, his voice still mild, the way his grandmother taught him to be when the air changes. "It's sealed." The next word was low and sharp. "Back up," she snapped, as if he'd crossed a line he hadn't. "I know your type." Someone by the cooler glanced over, then away. He felt the moment reach for him, the old choreography of humiliation, the misfiled assumption, the way a stranger's fear can become your responsibility. He stepped back because he was not there to prove anything, except that a simple return could remain simple. He left without the swap or the refund, but not without something else. In the parking lot, he watched a manager flick a glance at him and lock the door, and he felt a decision slide into place like a key. Some closures take months and money. Others start with a ledger and a plan. My type, he thought, buckling his seatbelt. The type that keeps receipts. It would only take weeks, not because he was a miracle worker, but because rusted structures fall fast when one good knock exposes how hollow they've become. He had grown up in a house where receipts really did live in a shoebox under the sink. Water bills folded like origami. Bus passes paper-clipped by month. Warranties rubber-banded and labeled in his mother's looping hand. "Paper remembers what people forget," she'd say, sliding a stapler across the table like a talisman. His grandmother did her remembering in stories. How she all but raised a family on tips and grace. How she learned to smile without surrender. How she looked men in the eye in rooms that told her not to, and did not blink first. His childhood was a geography of counters. Bodegas where the owner knew exactly which candy every kid would try to sneak and accepted. Instead, a handful of pennies. With dignity. Laundromats where neon signs glowed in the window like false promises, and the washer number 5 rattled like a sermon. Corner takeouts where the menu boards were older than he was, and the cashiers were fluent in 3 languages, and a dozen kinds of tired. He learned how commerce is supposed to feel when it's decent, not flattering, not brutal, just fair. From the time he was old enough to count change, he loved systems. The way a stockroom stacked right meant fewer trips. The way a checkout line moved when the scanner guns actually worked, and the prices matched the shelf tags. He once spent an entire summer relabeling jars in his mother's pantry, moving beans to the front and flour to the back, convinced that order could save a life. By high school, he had a side hustle fixing phones and cracked screens for classmates and their cousins. He set up in the corner of a barber shop with a tray of screwdrivers and a lamp that made everything honest. People would tell him their business, and he would not repeat it, because he took time with their devices like a doctor with a stethoscope. He learned that trust feels like time and shows up often as repeat customers. College took him to a city with a skyline that pretended to be invulnerable and a transit map that told a different story. He studied supply chains because the phrase itself felt like poetry, a promise braided through the world. He stayed up late reading case studies that didn't include neighborhoods like his and wrote notes in the margin. Where are we in this diagram? He worked retail nights to pay tuition, discovered the particular cruelty of a schedule algorithm that didn't care about bus routes, and learned the names of who to call when a manager tossed words like policy around as if they were hand grenades. On Sundays, he volunteered at a tenant clinic where people brought leases with clauses that might as well have been written in smoke. He learned to translate. He learned to document. He learned that sometimes the most radical act is to insist a form be filled out honestly. He carried the world in a backpack, a notebook for what he saw, a beat-up laptop, a bag of almonds, a charger with frayed insulation he kept promising to fix. He became the person friends texted when customer service turned into a maze, calm on hold, precise in email, patient enough to climb ladders of escalation without throwing the phone. He liked the structure of rules. He despised the way people hid behind them to dodge responsibility. By the time he walked into that chain store on a Tuesday afternoon, he wasn't armed for war. He was armed for life, a small, ridiculous hope that if he showed up politely, the world would reciprocate. He knew better because the city had taught him better. But knowledge does not make hope irrelevant. It makes it brave. The chain, Brightbox, discount everything from phone cases to paper towels, had colonized his area in the last few years, breeding in empty storefronts where community-owned stores had gasped for air and closed. Their signage was cheerful, their branding pastel, their prices just low enough to make people swallow the way the staff looked at certain customers differently. He had noticed. Everyone had. But noticing doesn't move a thing. Not by itself. He walked into Brightbox on a Tuesday at 2:17 p.m. because afternoon light is kinder than evening, because the after-school crush would make everything noisier, because there is a way you learn to move through your own city that you instinctively call safety, even if you are tired of being polite about it. He had bought the phone charger the day before in a hurry en route to a meeting. It was the wrong Model C instead of Lightning. A mistake was made. He was the adult who would fix it. He put the small box and the receipt on the counter like an offering. The clerk did not look at the box. She looked at the bulge of his shoulders under his sweatshirt. She looked at the convex mirror. She looked at the air around him as if it had moved wrong. He said hello anyway because habits are armor. The clerk, her badge reading Mira in block letters, pressed her lips together and said the sentence that begins certain kinds of scenes. Problem? Not really, he said. Just the wrong model. We don't take back electronics, she said, eyes sliding to the mirror. Too easy to, you know. Her voice lowered on the you know like it was a secret and an accusation. He kept his tone even, the way he'd taught himself when women clutched purses in elevators. It's sealed. Bought it here last night. I have the receipt. Mira exhaled through her nose as if she had just remembered something disgusting in the break room fridge. She tapped the box with a fingernail instead of picking it up. Then, louder, with a small performance for the benefit of the security camera. Back up. He was already the distance of the counter from her. He stepped half a step back anyway, a deliberate move that said, I am not here for combat. Two teenagers, near the candy rack, glanced at him. One's eyes widened briefly, then softened in that way a child's eyes do when they watch an adult decide how much dignity to keep. You people always try to return stuff without receipts, Mira said, ignoring the rectangle of paper under her hand. It was not loud. It was low. It was the kind of sentence said for the person it was aimed at, not for witnesses. It felt like it had been rehearsed. He blinked, very slowly, because sometimes slowness is a weapon that does not wound, and said carefully, I gave you the receipt. The manager, summoned by whatever invisible wire ties together tension and hierarchy, walked out from the back, a walk that said annoyance more than authority. He glanced at the scene and at the mirror and did not glance at the receipt. We can't do it, he said flat. Policy. What policy, he asked, because while truth does not always save you, it keeps you from drowning in someone else's fog. No one produced the slip of paper by the register that lists excluded categories. No one said the word electronics with context. Instead, the manager made a face that said, this is over. And Mira made a face that said, I have won something, small, and he felt a familiar fatigue settle between his shoulder blades. The price of keeping your voice low when everything else is loud. He gathered his box and his dignity and left. No yelling, no phone up, no speech. He did not owe the store a screenshot of his pain. He owed himself a strategy. In the parking lot, he sat with the engine off and wrote down the time, the names on the badges, The exact words. He saved the cashier. A number from the receipt. He walked the perimeter of the store making a quiet inventory, because he knew an old truth. Rot rarely stays in a single beam. The front door was propped with a rubber wedge that violated fire code. A dumpster enclosure yawned open, cardboard spilling like a tired secret. The posted business license was 3 months out of date. A handwritten notice taped by the clock-out machine inside, visible through the employee's only door window, read, "No overtime approved in any circumstances," which would be news to labor law. He took notes. Paper remembers. He went home, sat at his kitchen table, and made a plan the way a carpenter sets a level on a piece of wood. Step 1. Polite escalation. He wrote an email to Brightbox Corporate attaching the receipt, summarizing the incident without adjectives, asking for a refund and for a copy of the return policy in effect at store 1432. He carbon copied the DAS. General inbox listed on the Better Business Bureau page and, because he knew how attention works, pasted in 2 lines about the clerk's comment and how it made him feel. He didn't beg for dignity. He documented its theft. Step 2. Policy pressure. He read Brightbox's posted return policy online and took screenshots, then walked the block to the other Brightbox across the bus depot and asked what their policy was. "Sealed electronics with a receipt? 30 days, the cashier said. A teenager with a nose ring who seemed surprised there could be any other answer. He bought a pack of gum he didn't want to establish himself as a customer and walked out to the late winter light with proof that policy was code for whim. Step 3. Systems. He filed a complaint with the city's Consumer Protection Office, attaching his email and the policy screenshots. He filed a complaint with the State Labor Office about the no overtime sign, noting that it could signal wage theft for hourly workers. He used the city's 311 to report an open dumpster and a blocked fire exit because clarity sometimes is literal. He sent a note to a journalist he knew at the Alt Weekly, someone whose pieces had names like "Who owns this corner?" and "The storefronts that ate the block," and wrote a plain pitch. "Is Brightbox the new predatory chain we're all avoiding until we can't? I have receipts." Corporate replied with a template that read like an apology without an admission and offered a $10 credit. He wrote back, "Respectfully, you are missing the point," and attached everything again, highlighting, in yellow like a teacher, the line about Mira's words. The city auto replied. The state sent a case number and a list of what they would need an employee to prove. He went to bed with his jaw clenched and slept like someone who knows tomorrow will also be work. 2 days later, the journalist called. "I went to 3 Brightboxes," she said, laughing without humor. 2 blocked exits, 1 store with expired food items, a manager who told me the security camera didn't work, and a clerk who said they're paid as supervisors to be exempt from overtime, but also told me they keep the safe code on a piece of paper under the keyboard. He offered to go back with her to store number 1432. He did not want to be the face of someone else's piece, but he wanted a better room for the next person who walked in with a sealed box and a receipt and a humanity the store had decided not to see. They went at noon on a Saturday. It was busier. People in scrubs buying bleach, a father negotiating with 2 small children for a compromise candy. The manager saw him and stiffened. Mira pretended to be occupied by a display of batteries. The journalist introduced herself with a smile that made the air move. She asked about returns with a camera around her neck, not up. The manager said, "No comment," in a way that invited comment. She walked the aisles and noted mismarked prices, out-of-order signs on 2 of the 3 restrooms, and a piece of paper taped behind the counter that said, "No returns without manager approval." A sentence that did not match anything, online or in reality. The piece went up the following Tuesday. It did not lead with him, it led with a map. Brightboxes spread into closures of locally owned stores. It led with a quote from a worker who felt like she had to choose between a paycheck and a bladder. It included a paragraph about discrimination not as a scandal, but as something predictable, where low wages, few supervisors, and bad training intersect with bias. It included one sentence describing his experience as an example of how policy becomes cover for prejudice. It did not name Mira, it named the company. It asked the question he had been asking. What habits thrive behind pastel branding and low prices, and what will it take to change them? The chain had weathered small storms before. Mice in a stockroom, a viral picture of a moldy ceiling, tile. But something about this piece, in a week where the AG's office announced a crackdown on wage theft, in a month when the city council was considering a fair work-week ordinance, in a season when everyone was already angry about something, turned the story into a reef. The water changed. Boats started to scrape. In the days after the article, his phone became a switchboard. Former employees messaged him through friends. "We were made to clock out and keep stocking," one wrote, and he forwarded it to the journalist after asking permission and stripping names. "We lock customers in at closing and unlock only once we count the till," another wrote, and he forwarded that to the fire department because certain secrets become crimes when you speak them clearly. He didn't intend to become a clearinghouse. He intended to hold one store accountable and get a refund for a charger he no longer needed, because the man at the barber shop had given him one with a wink. But momentum is a tide that doesn't ask your preferences, and he had learned to swim. He called a labor organizer he knew from tenant meetings. She said what organizers say when the world changes in a week. They are already a union in their minds. We just have to catch up. She slid him a template for worker affidavits and told him to keep himself out of the center. He was not an employee. He would be a bridge. On Thursday, he held a coffee hour in the back of a library branch, posted quietly in a Facebook group for retail workers. 15 people showed up, cashiers in hoodies, an assistant manager whose voice shook when she described being told not to approve sick days, a janitor who came on his lunch break from another job because he wanted to see if other people had also been paid in manager comp time that never appeared as dollars. He didn't ask for stories. He asked questions that organized stories into evidence, dates, pay stubs, texts, schedule screenshots. He helped them see what they already knew, that their individual indignities were a pattern, and patterns are heavy enough to move institutions. Brightbox Corporate sent a letter to the Alt Weekly calling the piece sensationalist and promising an internal review. The city's consumer office emailed him to say that store number 1332 had been cited for deceptive return practices and would be required to post the actual policy at the register in all languages spoken by staff and customers. The fire marshal taped a red notice to the side door, "Cease use of blocked exit." The labor office called one of the workers to verify the sign about no overtime and asked for names. The tide pulled. He made a website over a weekend, ugly, necessary, called Brightfax, because naming is a form of power. It collected press clippings, anonymized worker testimony, and a list of where people could file complaints officially. It listed 3 practical actions anyone could take. Check your receipt, report mismarked prices, tell your story if a manager uses policy to cover bias. He added a section titled, "What to Do Instead," with a list of independent stores by neighborhood that carried the same goods and did not treat customers as suspects. He wasn't trying to burn the chain to the ground out of spite. He was trying to starve the habits he'd seen of oxygen. Corporate sent him a cease and desist with letterhead and phrases intended to make a person of average courage fold. Defamatory, interference, false statements, legal, remedies. He called a lawyer who had once negotiated a landlord down from a threat to a handshake for one of his tenant clinic clients. She read the letter, laughed, and wrote back, "We invite you to identify the false statements. Meanwhile, please expect additional claims to be added as more workers come forward." She liked to use the word meanwhile, the way grandmothers use wooden spoons. The boycott did not begin with celebrity or hashtag. It began with someone's aunt sending the article to a church group chat and someone's uncle texting, "No more Brightbox" to the block thread. It began with a bus driver reminding a woman in line that returns were allowed with receipts. and a clerk bending to policy because witnesses. It began with workers at 3 stores calling in sick the same day and a manager told to work 16 hours to cover shifts. It began with subtle emptiness, a Tuesday morning where only 2 people browsed, a Friday evening where the line never formed, the week the chain's sales dipped just enough to trigger a visit from a regional manager. He kept receipts on everything. He had a spreadsheet where he tracked actions and responses like a scientist. Call on Monday, city reply Wednesday, article, Tuesday store citation Friday, worker coffee Thursday, 3 affidavits by next Friday, boycotts measured by foot traffic counts the journalist gathered by standing across the street and tallying entry and exit every hour on the hour with a clipboard and a volunteer. Corporate offered a meeting. He declined because the terms were vague. They tried a public gesture, a donation of cleaning supplies to a community center, a press release about recommitting to our values. He screenshot them and added them to the site under Moves. To watch, with a simple note. Generosity is good. Accountability is better. They offered him a gift card. He posted the image of the card, numbers masked, and under it wrote, policy with teeth, plastic with dollars. A city council member saw the piece and saw the momentum and saw an opportunity. He announced a hearing on the impact of predatory chains on community retail ecosystems. It was the kind of hearing that often results in nothing because it is in love with its own sound. He prepared testimony anyway. He did not lead with his incident. He led with numbers, closures of independents since Brightbox entry, code violations per square foot, the uncanny correlation between wages and shrink theft, the way underpay leads to undercare. He added a minute on bias that did not turn into sermon. When pay is low and training is poor, prejudice is a shortcut some workers take under stress. This is not an excuse. It is a warning to build better systems so individuals aren't set up to fail or to harm. The chain's lawyer showed up in a suit that cost a week of working a cash wrap. He said they valued community. He said they were listening. He said misunderstanding until the word lost meaning. Workers took the mic, faces blurred in the TV feed because some risks are too expensive, and said other words. Unpaid, unsafe, humiliated. Paper, towels instead of gloves, wage theft. The council member looked stagey. The room felt real. The collapse, when it came, did not look like a collapse. It looked like a set of letters in stamped envelopes going to landlords the chain already owed 1 month of rent, too. It looked like suppliers holding invoices and making decisions about whose call to take. It looked like a regional manager opening a spreadsheet and seeing negative numbers in a week that should have been up. It looked like small things. The delivery truck that did not show. The shelf that stayed empty because the stockroom was locked, because the assistant manager with the key had quit, because the schedule was chaos. He received a text on a Wednesday from a worker at store, Yeber 1432. They told us to take an early lunch. When we came back, a locksmith was there. He was in line at a coffee shop. He stepped out of it. Who told you? He wrote back. Regional said corporate making changes. He wrote the journalist. She was already on her bike. The shuttering of store Nav 1432 became a 2-paragraph blip in the city paper and a 4-minute segment on the Alt Weekly's podcast about the speed with which certain businesses arrive and the speed with which they leave when the math stops favoring them. But store Jabri 1432 was not alone. The next 10 days, 6 bright boxes within a 20-mile radius taped up closed for inventory signs, and then simply, quietly, did not reopen. Officially, the chain announced a strategic consolidation. Unofficially, workers shared screenshots of emails from corporate that said, resourcing challenges, negative publicity, legal exposure. The fire marshal posted an update. All violations at store number 1432 corrected by closure. The labor office asked his organizer friend to connect them with more workers because they had opened a wider investigation. The city consumer office mailed him a small note, rare and human. Thank you for reporting the return policy discrepancy. We found a pattern. We are referring some of the matters to the AG. He watched the door chimes go silent, each one a small bell at a funeral. For laziness and cruelty, it was not a perfect victory. Employees, some of whom had treated customers badly, were also losing paychecks. Managers who had been told to enforce bad rules lost jobs. He refused to publish names. He posted an updated "What to Do Instead" list with open positions at other retailers, a schedule of career center resume workshops, a one-page guide on how to claim unpaid wages if a store closes. Brightbox Corporate tried one more feint. A rebrand in a nearby region, same pastel. New name? He updated the web page with "Beware the new labels on old boxes." The journalist wrote a follow-up that didn't pat anyone on the back and didn't dunk either. It explained how a store chain can be both symptom and amplifier of neighborhood harm, how low prices extracted from other people's dignity are always a bill that comes due. He finally opened his own box of a lesson and looked inside. It contained this: you cannot control who looks at you and sees a problem. You can control which problems you choose to solve. He had not screamed. He had not called names. He had not filmed a stranger and fed the internet. He had done something, both more boring and more unforgiving. He had made a list and then worked it. An email came from Brightbox Corporate's lawyer. Different tone, suddenly polite. "We are interested in learning how we might address some of the concerns you have raised," it read, "with a view toward constructive community engagement." He forwarded it to the Alt Weekly with the subject, "We are all students." Then he archived it. He did not owe them a syllabus. He didn't run victory laps. He went back to the stores on his block that had names and faces, not committees. He brought a case of toilet paper to the cafe run by the woman who memorized everyone's allergies and laughed when she tried to pay him for it. "Consider it a dividend," he said, and they both knew he meant the kind that doesn't show up on a balance sheet. He used BrightFacts to start listing good operators, chains and independents that had return policies that matched the signs that treated workers like they were adults, that stocked shelves without raiding souls. He refined what he called the PRAM, process map. Step 1, ask. 2, document. 3, locate the real rule. 4, escalate politely. 5, escalate publicly but precisely. 6, give alternatives. 7, loop in regulators. 8, help the people who will get caught in the jaws of the change. People began, sending him their own prams for different fights, a daycare that continued charging for closed days, a landlord who forgot heat, a transit line whose temporary reroute stranded a block for a month. On a Tuesday a month after store, Florings 32 closed, he saw Mira, not at a counter. On a bus, uniform of another chain on, face as tired as any other face in the window at that hour. He considered not saying anything. He considered being petty. He chose a third way. "Hey," he said, in the tone of a neighbor, not a judge. She looked up, surprised. Recognition is complicated. Her mouth opened, then closed. "I'm sorry," she said eventually. He nodded. "Me too," he said. "I wish someone had trained you better." The line between personal and systemic is not a line. It is a braid. You can pull one strand without cutting the others if you are careful, if you are patient, if you decide not to inflate yourself at the expense of clarity. He gathered lessons into a workshop he called Receipts and Remedies, hosted once a month in a library room that smelled like old paper and new possibility. He taught people how to write emails that get read, how to cite rules without sounding like a parody of a HOA president, how to move from "I'm angry" to "here are 3 changes you can make by Friday." He went back to the store where the teenager had told him the actual return policy without fear. He asked to speak to the manager. He said, "Thank you for training your staff well." The manager blinked, suspicious, then smiled like a person who needs to hear praise aloud because otherwise the day is too heavy. He left a review online. It felt corny. It felt necessary. Accountability without affirmation curdles into sport. Affirmation without accountability curdles into propaganda. He had learned a balance. Months later, a small wire piece in a business section read that Brightbox had restructured debt, and streamlined operations and exited underperforming markets. No one mentioned the open doors taped with red notices. No one mentioned the worker affidavits. No one mentioned the sentence Mira had said under breath and the way it had banged around a man's skull until it arranged itself into a plan. It didn't matter. He did not need credit. He needed counters where humans would be treated like customers rather than suspects. His grandmother kept a clippings folder anyway, not because she wanted the world to see, but because she wanted him to never forget that stories have paper trails. "This city raised you," she said, tapping the folder's edge. "It doesn't always know it, but it did." He smiled and put the folder on the shelf above the shoebox under the sink. "Because traditions can become systems if you do them on purpose." A clerk snapped. A manager hid behind policy. A man kept his voice level and his receipts close, and decided to pull a thread where the fabric was already thin. This isn't a fable about personal virtue. It's a manual in disguise. How to turn a private humiliation into a public improvement without letting the internet pawn your pain for clicks. If you are standing at a counter with a breath stuck in your throat, know this: the moment doesn't have to end at the door. You don't have to become a viral moment to be effective. You can become a file, a list, a case number. You can become the person who asks for the actual policy, and then the person who makes sure a sign matches it. You can become the bridge between a worker who has been told to break the law to keep her job and the office that will make her boss stop. You can become the quiet danger to bad habits that thought no one was watching. If you are a manager, understand the temptation of policy and resist it. Train your staff so they don't reach for prejudice when they are scared. Put the rules in writing where customers can see them. If you are corporate, remember that low prices don't cancel out harm. They hide it, for a while. And if you are a city, write ordinances with teeth, not press releases with adjectives. He shut down a chain in weeks not because he was special, but because the chain was ready to fall and he pushed in the right places. That is good news. It means the next push could be yours. It means the next time a bell rings and a human walks in, the world might treat them like what they are, a person with a receipt and a right to be there. Bring a pen. Bring a plan. Bring a belief that paper remembers, and that memory, organized well, can change a block.